Good morning, everyone. Let me call the post 24th public meeting to order. We have a quorum. I want to mention at the beginning of this meeting, we welcome members of the public. You may have noticed, members of the public, that our agenda this time did not indicate that there would be a portion of our meeting devoted to public comment. Our executive director will take up during the course of his remarks how to present information or questions you may have to him or to other members of the staff. And I think with that, let me ask for a motion to approve the minutes of the June 1st, 2022 meeting.
So moved.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Thank you. And I think with that, let me canvass each member of the commission. Commissioner Bluestone has seconded the motion, so she votes affirmative. Commissioner Calderon?
Yes.
Commissioner Sherry is unable to be with us today. Commissioner Ellison, do you approve?
Yes.
And Commissioner Kezerozian moved, so she approves. Commissioner Luma?
Approved.
And Commissioner West?
Yes.
Thank you. And I also approve. And with that, the minutes of the June 1st meeting are approved. We turn next to our executive director's report. Please, Enrique.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Good morning. Good morning to everybody. We've been very busy, as you may know, on the recertification process. The deadline was June 15 of past week. And I'm going to be sharing my screen and walking through a presentation to give you the highlights of what we are seeing in terms of the process that we have conducted and are conducting, continue to be very busy. And in order to meet the statutory deadline of June 30th, which is the expiration of the statutorily granted certification of people with last names A through H. So I'm going to be, the majority of my remarks are going to be based on that. And again, I'm going to share my screen to go through a PowerPoint presentation. And I would really welcome commissioners' questions at any point to clarify what are clearly only highlights of a very detailed process and involved process that we have been conducting. So if you bear with me, let me just share my screen. Can everybody see this? So as I started to mention, commissioners, this journey of the recertification process started a few months ago. It has been a bit of a race against deadlines. I'm happy to report that we are on track to meet another deadline, one that was very consequential because this pertains to the recertification status of of a large portion of the police officers in the state, those who are a last name A through H. I'll remind commissioners and the public that the statutory certification of those officers expires on June 30th of 2022. We have designed and implemented a process or a process for that recertification. And we set a deadline of June 15 for submitting certain information. Commissioners, of course, are very familiar with that. I'll highlight a little bit of that later. And that submission has been progressing and is ongoing. For the most part, the vast majority of agencies complied with this deadline. But I want to highlight something here, which is that given these timeframes, there was very little time to process all the information received. We continue to do that, and the way we did that is through real-time data validation using smart technology. I can get into that later. But the reality also is that there has been quite a bit of work, weekends, the last long weekend, late evenings, early mornings from both the certification and the technology teams, many of them in the screen here today. Also, I want to acknowledge the hard work and tight deadlines for us also meant a lot of hard work and tight deadlines for every law enforcement agency that we deal with. And they have been very much working towards meeting these deadlines. And given this very short time frame, the immediate focus, the very, very short immediate focus will be on issuing and processing certifications and conditional certifications. And I'll explain in a few minutes the difference and how that's going to be processing, how we're going to be processing those. And we'll be dealing with certain exceptions in the coming days. And I'm also going to speak a little bit as to what those exceptions are and how we're going to deal with them at a high level. So moving on, just a brief reminder that we requested certain information in a submission template. That template, by the way, had certain validation fields to make sure that we didn't encounter some of what we encountered back with the disciplinary process, which were dates in the wrong format, or email addresses that are not really an email address, and then causes reason to validate more of that data. So in this case, technology was really helpful, and we're validating in real time, as I mentioned earlier, key information and the responses to the two questions, the part 1 and the part 2 questions that we had where it applied. The information that's unique to every officer is, of course, the name, date of birth, start of employment, ID number, email, and the evaluator's name. Some of this key information will be able to corroborate and cross-reference with our own other databases of disciplinary records, and that's why it's important to continue to capture these fields. There are, in the submission template that I mentioned, there are 15 questions that are comprised of the part 1, and those are mostly relative to what section 4F in the statute speaks about. I'll highlight that question 15 is a question that we're asking as part of the submission template, whether the questionnaire, the 8-question questionnaire that we are terming part 2 was conducted. And of course, whether the agency head attests to the good moral character of the individual in question in that submission template. And if they don't, then we're asking that questionnaire, the 8 questions or part 2, be submitted to us in the same portal, but only for those individuals that have no attestation of good moral character by their chief. Another important part that the certification team corroborates in real time when we get the submissions is the signature or the attestation page, so that we can treat the submission information as validated by the individual, in most cases, the chief of the agency. Just moving on, again, a brief reminder of the section 4F1 in the statute that talks about certain categories or requirements that we need to corroborate as part of this recertification process. And these are the 15 questions in that submission template that I was just speaking about a few minutes ago. With the date, we corroborate that the person is over 21. There's questions relative to their basic training, the examination that is part of that, physical and psychological evaluations, whether they were ever conducted, a background check as well, compliance with a CPR or first aid certification, whether there's a felony conviction, whether somebody has been listed in the National Recertification Index, that's number 10, And numbers 11, 12, 13, and 14 have to do with compliance with our own disciplinary record submissions, whether there have been any disciplinary finding in the past and whether that has been submitted, and whether there's a current or ongoing internal affairs investigation and whether that has been submitted. So we are getting a lot of, as a result of questions 11 through 14, we are getting a lot of updates and requests for updates on records that we had received before. As I mentioned in my earlier slides, there's also the question as to whether an oral interview or the questionnaire was conducted. The potential answers to those is whether it was not conducted, or whether it was conducted and there are exceptions, or whether it was conducted and there are no exceptions. Unfortunately, the way that question is phrased, some agencies took it to mean that question 15 were relative to exceptions on questions 1 through 14, and not necessarily on the questionnaire. So we are working through that process to corroborate that what they meant in some instances on an exception basis. But the point is that the most important part is to corroborate whether the oral interview, in other words, the questionnaire, was conducted, and look at the reasons or the comments field to figure out what the reasons were. And again, I'm gonna be talking a little bit more about some of those reasons. Just a brief overview of the process. And let me back up a little bit. I meant to mention at the very beginning that commissioners might remember that when we started the disciplinary process, I termed that our stopgap measure. In other words, just submit a spreadsheet to a general mailbox, and we take it from there. That was by necessity something we had to do in the technology world. We termed it the stopgap measure to comply with the deadline. We went to work on something called JIRA, which is a project management tool, which is the portal that everybody has been accessing to manage all the workflows of these submissions. But this is still what we call the interim solution. This has been working really well thanks to the work of a lot of technology folks, and we'll continue to work for this process. But we anticipate that, and we're also in the process of contracting with a technology services firm, because we did a big procurement, to what we call the permanent solution. What this has meant is that we've availed ourselves by necessity of the patience of the law enforcement agencies, who are really having to submit things in different ways, because they started doing something initially in our stopgap measure. They're going to be doing this for the next few months on our interim solution, and eventually we'll get to our permanent solution, and again we'll have to deploy that as well. This is all a result of the tight deadlines that we have had from the very beginning. But this interim solution is logging into something that's called JIRA. It's a portal where agencies have to request credentials. They receive an email with those credentials, and they eventually, so that we can validate who the person submitting the information is, we can have some secure transfer of that data. Sometimes, unfortunately, those credentials go to the spam folders of some agencies, because that's the way the network administrators treat automatically generated emails in many cases. So our team had to work with clarifying that, to look for those credentials, to maybe re-ask to get those credentials submitted to us, and we guided people through that process. Once they're able to access that portal, they can upload the submission template that I described earlier, that had the 15 questions, that had drop down options to answer so that then the data is validated in real time. They also have to upload the signature page or the actual attestation, because the template, the submission template only provides for the questions, but the attestation and the template go together, and they're meant to be together. They're required to upload questionnaires, if any, because again, if they're attesting to all of the officers with A through H, there may be no need to submit the questionnaire conducted on any officers if they're attesting to the good moral character. And what happens as part of this portal is that they accept these submissions, and they're typically termed tickets. This type of process is used in many other places for tracking service type requests. And this is what we have availed ourselves again to process all of these data. Once those tickets have been validated in some way, as I mentioned before, that there's a signature attestation page, that there's not necessarily a validation error, all of that data can then be uploaded into the main database that we have, something called Snowflake. And prior to that, or even during that, we are communicating through the portal in real time with people with those credentials. So if we can, our team sees that there's seemingly a validation error, or there does not seem to be a signature page, or there's not a signature page for let's say for the chief whose last name is between A through H, we're communicating through the portal by sending them emails, and all of that, all of those records, all of those communications are then stored as part of that ticket, and the whole team then can know at any given point where things stand with a particular agency, whether they owe us a resubmission or they have submitted something that we were expecting, and so on. And that's one of the beauties of this tool, to be able to track communication and do a lot faster data validation as well as workflow processing. What I do mean by the workflow processing is that we begin to use both technology and human eyes to look at how these submissions are falling in terms of the categories of certified, conditionally certified, and further review that I'll explain in a few more minutes. It will also allow us to do a lot of great reporting, because everything that's uploaded to the database that I was mentioning will give us a lot of important exception reports. For example, what agencies have not submitted anything yet, and that would then allow us to contact them directly to say, is there something that's pending, or do you have no officers that fall between A through H, that sort of thing. So all of this is taking place, as I mentioned, in very real time, as anticipated. Because of the tight deadlines that I mentioned, a lot of the information that came to this portal happened literally on June 14 and June 15, the day prior to and the day of the deadline. So everybody has been working really hard to do a lot of what I just described, literally in the last week. So let me get to some of those agency submission results. Again, these are preliminary, but they're the result of a lot of the careful and validation and work that I just described. We believe that there are 439 agencies that fall within post scope. And I say we believe because commissioners will recall that there's been some work recently in terms of the construction of scope. Certain agencies that were first identified by the MPTC as having some kind of role in the law enforcement world. We have fine-tuned those that scope, if you will, from recent work from our general counsel and others. We have 387 agencies that have submitted the information that we required. And I feel very good about that very large number. We have, as of yesterday, 25 agencies that have requested an extension that now our regulations allow, and we have been granting. The number one reason for those requests of extension is that, again, the time that it takes to deploy and do the things that we're asking people to do, and the availability and things and other work that agencies have to do to try to meet these deadlines. There are 27 agencies that are pending submission, and that breaks down into 16 police departments, 9 special state police officer facilities. Those are colleges or hospitals, and 2 sheriff's offices. And I might add here that these are very small departments, the ones in this list of 27 agencies. It is quite possible that a couple of those may have no officers between A through H, so they're not out of compliance simply because they're in that list of no submission. And that is something important to remark at this point, because we have been reaching out since, at the end of last week, when we were processing all of those submissions, there were at least a couple of agencies that we reached out to, and they said, well, there's no A through H member of our police roster. So I don't want to give the impression that perhaps 27 agencies are entirely out of compliance. Also, these are very small departments. So I want to just underscore the notion that this is not a large group. As I mentioned, we are contacting these agencies in real time, as late as last night, with getting some contacts, and we'll continue to do that to ask them to submit, at a minimum, a request for extension as soon as possible. As I mentioned, when they request an extension, we are still requiring that they submit a roster of individuals that fall in the category of last name A through H, so that we can issue them a conditional certification as of July 1, based condition on them submitting the information that we're requesting, but so that nobody is left without a certification status between the deadline and July 1. I see Commissioner Calderon, you have a question for me, sir?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Director. I might be jumping the gun, but the 25 agencies that requested extensions, I'm already aware that Boston is one of them. Is it possible to get that list and share it with the rest of the commission at some point?
Yes, Commissioner. Notably, in that list, there is the Boston Police Department and the State Police, the 2 largest agencies in the state that requested extensions. Maybe during my remarks, I can have one of the members of my team just look up that list, and we can either share it with commissioners, before the end of this meeting, or recite them, or distribute them right after the meeting. But there's a couple of larger. Just off the top of my head or my prior notes, I know Brookline, Brockton, Revere, Plymouth County Sheriff's Office, Canton, mid-sized type, agencies with an important number of people in the roster that, again, have been working very hard to try to meet that deadline, and we've been granting those requests for extension.
Thank you. There's no rush. At a later date, if we could share them, that's all we're looking for. Thank you.
Sure. As I mentioned, it's been both dealing with requests for extensions, processing, all the information that I mentioned in terms of data validation, so that we can put through everybody who should be put through, and then reaching out to those without a submission that has been keeping our team quite busy in these last few days. And frankly, it'll continue to be for the next few days, even after the July 1 milestone, because we'll be dealing with processing those with extensions, and we'll be also dealing with the conditions meet people. When we issue a conditional certification, people are going to then want to corroborate information that meet the conditions, and we're going to have to keep track of that as well. So the theme, if I may say so again, is that the team has been very busy, both the technology team and the certification team, myself, our legal team, etc. Everybody has been really busy trying to put through all of these information so that we're able to meet those deadlines. Let me talk a little bit more, even though I already touched on this, on the process for extensions. Commissioners will remember that our recently promulgated regulations allow us to grant 30-day extensions. These extensions are being granted, and I want to emphasize this, from post deadlines. This is not an extension from the June 30th statutory expiration date. So the next deadline, when we grant an extension, is really July 15, which is 30 days after June 15. This is so that we can continue to process and the data as I have been describing it in a good way. Underline here, which is an emphasis as well that I think is necessary. If and when agencies request an extension, we still require that they submit a rosters of officers as soon as possible. Again, the reason for this is that so that we can issue a conditional certification of those officers so that they don't lose or their status as a law enforcement officer is not challenged in some way later on because we had not issued something affirmatively. So we are reaching out to those agencies that have submitted requests for extensions, and you can see that there's 25 agencies that have requested extensions, but only 12 that have submitted those officers' rosters. Again, as we speak yesterday, and will continue to be before the end of this week, we want to have those rosters in our system so that, again, everybody can be deemed conditionally certified at a minimum. Just to Commissioner Calderon's earlier question, those 12 agencies that I told you, Commissioner, including the Boston PD and the State Police, have indeed submitted the officers' rosters, which is very good news. The largest agencies understand that they requested an extension, but they have complied with our request to submit officer rosters. So none of those officers will be, quote unquote, in limbo, if I may use that word. They will be conditionally certified, and with the condition that their agencies submit all information that we're asking before the end of the extension timeframe. But again, the team is working hard on reaching out to those 13 agencies that have requested an extension, but we have not yet seen, for whatever reason, a submission of the roster of officers in the JIRA portal. Let me also just give you some preliminary numbers of or aggregate metrics, as I mentioned this here. With those agencies that I mentioned before, I can report that there are 6,127 officers of agencies that have submitted all the information required, which is an important figure. Of the agencies that have submitted an extension request and have also submitted their officers in their rosters, there are 2,231 officers that we're able to essentially count, and will be issuing, at a minimum, a conditional certification. And that's the note asterisk here on number 1. Those represent 12 agencies, including the Boston PD, that happens to have 882 individuals whose last name is A through H, and the State Police that have 980 people in that category. Those two, you can tell, is really skew the number because those are the two largest agencies. But again, they have come in, they have been granted an extension. We have their rosters, and we will be issuing them a conditional certification. The 13 agencies that requested an extension but we don't have a roster, we have an estimate of about 225 or perhaps more officers that fall in that category. Again, we are asking individual agencies that they submit a roster of those individuals as soon as possible. And again, this is something we'll be hoping to process before June 30th. Just going back to the list of agencies that I mentioned that have not submitted anything, which again could be because there's no officers A through H, or because they haven't quite gotten around to submitting. We believe that given the size of those agencies, we would be talking about only about 50 officers to be submitted. So you can see that the agencies that have not submitted are really agencies that have 2, 3, 4 officers that may fall in the category of A through H. This will put us at an approximate overall number of officers that fall in this category A through H of 8,600 individuals. And this is the breakdown that, again, I'm able to report at this point. I want to spend a couple of minutes with just explaining perhaps what is the difference between a figure that I have been talking about quite a bit and the MPTC has been talking about in the past, which was this notion of 10,000 individuals that would fall in the category of A through H. And I want to go back to the reality that this figure was an estimate during the process of the 2020 legislative process that occurred when the legislature was contemplating police reform. This was a figure that the MPTC provided to the legislature to figure out just how many people would fall in each one of those categories, or each one of those thirds of the alphabet. Of course, since then, there have been a number of people who have retired or left the force, and new members that have come in terms of the graduating classes. I'll remind commissioners that we've been certifying those new cadets since December 1st, and at least, and we can count that of those people that we have certified since then, 348, 144 of those are in the category of A through H. Also, we'll note that Post will be certifying 200 new officers this month as part of recently graduating academies. I also would note that given the construction of scope discussions that we had in prior recent meetings, some agencies are falling out of scope of Post. Those I can just off the top of my head, your commissioners might remember that the ABCC, for example, and other agencies were initially thought to perhaps fall within scope, and given the analysis that our general counsel and our outside counsel did, it was determined that they would not fall within scope. Now, that's not to say that some would still want to be certified by Post, and that process will continue. And there's also another, perhaps a reason that we're seeing a smaller number than initially estimated, and that is the reality that some people that were perhaps, that were candidates to go to the Bridge Academy because they had been perhaps working as a part-time officer or had been a reserve officer, in the past, and needed to have the Bridge Academy training, decided not to go. And that may account for some of that lower numbers. Any questions from commissioners? I'm not able to see unless people raise their hands. Like Commissioner Calderon, I'll continue because I'm not able to see everybody in the screen. Okay, So I want to spend a couple of minutes just talking about certain exceptions. There are in my, as we're thinking about exceptions, there are what we call technical exceptions. Something that is an answer to question 1 through 14 that is not, in compliance with the statute, but there are, and we will give people, 90 days or certain other time allowance to complete or comply with that requirement. Excuse me. Some of the exceptions that we're seeing the most of are requirements relative to in-service training and the completion of the Bridge Academy. And when we issue the conditional certification, we will issue those certifications with the condition that they complete their in-service training or they complete everything associated with the completion of the Bridge Academy, as directed by the MPTC, for example. I mentioned this earlier, but on number 2 here, there's exceptions to the questionnaire, and we are tracking that very, with some detail, because there are instances in which maybe the questionnaire was not conducted, and there are reasons behind it that, again, we need to follow up on. In the instances where the questionnaire was not conducted, for varying reasons, we will still ask and condition the recertification on the conductor, on the questionnaire being conducted. There was at least one agency that thought it was voluntary, and as long as the chief attested to their good moral character that they didn't have to conduct the questionnaire, and we clarified that no, it is required, so you can go back and conduct it, even if you already conducted an interview of some kind. But we will continue to reach out to individual agencies where there was an exception of this kind. And of course, one that has always been in my mind, I've talked about it before, and commissioners understand, if there is no attestation of good moral character of the individual, whether the questionnaire was conducted or not, this category is one where we really need to understand and begin to follow up on. The people in this category are not necessarily going to get a certification. They're not going to get a certification right away, and we're going to have to study these cases, and we'll continue. We'll come back to report more on that at later times. All right. Just to put some of those numbers that I talked about in perspective. Even though we can anticipate that we'll have about 8,600 perhaps individuals, we can report on the 6,127 that have been successfully submitted. There's again a number of agencies that requested an extension, and we cannot yet know how they're going to fall. But I wanted to give the numbers, how they break down, and I have those numbers in parentheses because I believe that those same type of ratios will transfer into those other individuals that we have not yet seen submitted. And I think it's worthy of notice that the vast majority of police officers have no exception at all, and they can be and will be certified fairly quickly. We'll begin to send notices as early as the end of this week, and certainly within the deadline, to people without any exceptions. There's about 11% or 645 of these 6,000 individuals with some kind of exception. They will be conditionally certified, so long as they meet that exception at a later time. The earliest of those timeframes are going to be 90 days, but there are in some cases work requirements, for example, of people attending the Bridge Academy, where that condition or that requirement is met even beyond 90 days. And again, we'll be tracking that, but I would put these 11% or 645 officers where the condition is, fairly straightforward. They have to comply with their in-service training, or they have to finish up the bridge, or they have to get a CPR, whatever certification was required that they don't have, etc. At this juncture, was actually as of yesterday, there were still 3% of individuals that we had not processed, because these are individuals, agencies that are submitting in real time. And there are about 1% of individuals that have been processed but merit further review. At this point, there's nobody that will be in the category of not certified. I can pause there to take questions or continue if commissioners have any of those, or continue. You'll allow me. I just have a couple more slides just to finish up. There's, as I mentioned before, but I'll just highlight again, of those 11% or so people that are currently falling in the conditionally certified category, it's either because there's the most prevalent exception is what I mentioned. They're not current with their in-service training requirement or the CPR certification, and they'll have 90 days with our conditional certification to complete those requirements. Something we believe is fairly straightforward, and they will meet, but we'll track that. There are a few in which the questionnaire was submitted with exceptions or not conducted. There are people on an approved leave, injured on duty, for illness or military leave, and there's of course the legitimate answer of I did not conduct the questionnaire, etc. And they may be in the vast majority of those cases, the chief is attesting to their good moral character, but we cannot corroborate that a questionnaire was conducted. So in all likelihood, our condition is that when they return or from that leave, that they conduct the questionnaire and they'll be in compliance with that requirement. There are other instances in which maybe the officer is on an administrative leave or unpaid leave, and then that may be due to a pending disciplinary matter or a prior matter that is under appeal, and so on. Again, these are the type of categories that or cases that we'll have to study carefully on a one-on-one basis. And there's also the other category for not conducting the questionnaire, in which they either had provided no explanation, they say they're not attending the bridge, or there was a union concern. And again, we're gonna ask that they have 90 days to conduct that questionnaire, regardless of whether they fall in this category. I'll mention also another exception. Given all the hard work that our colleagues at the MPTC have been doing to try to implement the Bridge Academy and those work requirements, there are instances in which literally the Bridge Academy ends or concludes on July 1. And so therefore, as of June 15, they cannot say they have completed it, but we'll be tracking all of those dates very closely. There was one instance of one course that they could not provide until later this year. So as soon as the MPTC can tell us that they've complied with that, we'll be good with that time frame. I see Commissioner Calderon, you raised your hand, sir.
Yes, Mr. Director, if you could clarify this for me at the bottom, number 2, the other no explanation, not attending the bridge union concern. Can you clarify where that union concern is coming from? Is that a chief that's not attesting to the good moral character, quoting the union, or how is that?
No, Commissioner. There were a couple of agencies that said that their union was concerned about the questionnaire, and they did not conduct the questionnaire. This is not a lack of attestation. So this is only a no conduction of the questionnaire. If we, I don't know any more details than, union concern, but that's direct quote from the explanation they provided. And whatever the concern might be, our position is and will be that they have to go conduct that questionnaire, and they will have 90 days to do that.
So that's what I was trying to clear up. So it's the chief of the organization has not conducted the questionnaire protocol so far, the interview with the officers, right? And the chief is quoting the excuse, or the reason being is that it's a union concern. Do I understand that correctly?
Correct. And it could be several reasons. I don't know if they wanted to be, to make this part of the, the bargaining process, which is a legitimate ask, I might add, from the union, and the chief may have decided not to. I don't know. I don't want to speculate, sir, but they are literally saying there was a union concern. And by the way, when they quoted this, it was two agencies that had the same answer for a number of officers. So this was not a one-off. I don't want to give you the impression that maybe a union was fine with everybody except one or two people. That's what we're seeing in this instance.
I appreciate the answer. Is it possible, along with requesting information, could I also request that those departments and their chief, could we have that information shared with the commission as well as to what chief, what department is quoting the union concern, thus not following through?
For sure. We can follow up with that, Commissioner.
Thank you, sir.
Commissioner Ellison, you also had a question?
Yes, Enrique. Thank you, Director. I have a two-part question. One, what are we doing with, I know you mentioned this about the cases where there may be issues outstanding, where someone may have been certified, but an issue has arose since that time, or if there's been a complaint filed with the post or their department, those officers who that matter has not been resolved. What are we doing with those folks at this time?
Well, Commissioner, there's the biggest, the most important juncture that we follow is whether somebody is attested and the chief is attesting to a good moral character or not. That becomes kind of like a bit of a fork in the road, if you will. So if the individual is the chief is attesting to their good moral character, and there may be a pending matter, disciplinary or otherwise, we might take a look at it, but what will govern is mostly, the fact that the chief is attesting to the good moral character. In the subset, the small subset, the 1% that I mentioned earlier, where the chief is not attesting to the good moral character, there's a few reasons. One of them may be that there is a pending matter, that is either being processed or even appealed, and we're going to look at those and figure out the details of those. Those are the 69 or 1% figure that we are talking about. Is your question whether that what the status of those individuals will be in the coming days, Commissioner?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll likely issue them a conditional certification, but one that's slightly different from the one that I've been talking about, which is just go meet this requirement, like just go get your certification on the CPR or not, and let us know. This conditional certification will mean that we'll study this in much more detail, and it's something that we have to just study on a one-on-one basis.
Thank you.
Other questions from commissioners, or I'll move on to the next and last slide as per my my presentation, and it's really just leaving you with the next steps. The outreach to agencies without a submission is ongoing. It's happening in real time. Again, at this point, we're simply asking them to submit a roster so that we, if they have them, if they have officers that are A through H, so that we can conditionally, so we can give them an extension and process them, in the next 30 days. We will be and are preparing to send notifications to agencies for individuals whose status is certified or conditionally certified. And commissioners will have seen in the packet that we have those notices as part of the packet. In each one of those, there will be a condition. For those conditionally certified, there will be a condition attached based on the type of technical exception and the time frame that they're required to submit it by. So those 14 or 15 really, 15 questions that I mentioned, whether there was a questionnaire that was not conducted or a certification that was not a CPR, for example, that was not that is not obtained, each individual will get their individual requirement and condition communicated to them. We'll ask that we're going to send all these notices to the agencies and ask that those agencies record and distribute them. But we'll be tracking these conditions at an individual level, which is a big lift for the team and something that we'll continue to manage. We'll continue to process the submissions and validation errors. There's still some signature pages that are missing, or maybe an attestation for the chief that we haven't not yet received, some date formats, etc. And this is also a very involved and necessary process, and we'll continue. We'll, as I mentioned before, we'll process those agencies that requested extensions, and we'll analyze all those reasons I just spoke about, the no attestation or the questionnaire not conducted and whatnot. That is very much something that is keeping us very busy, and we'll continue to do that. And of course, we'll track when those conditions are met, and we'll remove the condition, and then their certification will be good for another 3 years. So I'll pause there, commissioners. I'll stop sharing my screen and I can return to questions if that pleases the commissioners.
Enrique, this is not going to be a question. This is going to be a comment. You said at the beginning of your remarks that there had been an extraordinary amount of time and effort put in by technology staff and by our certification staff. I must, speaking personally, and I know speaking for all of the commissioners, applaud. You have given us inordinate amount of detail. I think we are all in awe at what has been accomplished in a relatively short period of time. And again, I know I speak for everyone. I suspect I also speak for members of the public who are listening today at saying that there should be a round of applause for all that the staff have done in accomplishing what has been accomplished up until this point. It really is an extraordinary amount of work. We commissioners know what the staff has been doing. And we really applaud your efforts.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair and commissioners. I get to be the one to tell you about this, and many of the people showing their faces, thankfully, have been working really hard. And it's only because of their efforts that we're able to, and we are very confident and excited that we're going to meet these deadlines. Even though there is a couple of exceptions, but we always knew, and we had to anticipate some of those exceptions, and we'll continue to manage them. So thank you on my behalf to all of the team who's also doing a fantastic job and continues to do a great effort to get this done.
Again, thank you. Any other questions or comments on this particular issue from my fellow commissioners? I don't think I see any hands in the air. Let me then please move on to item number 4 on our agenda, which is the delegation of hiring authority to the executive director. I turn now to our general counsel, Randy Ravitz.
Thank you very much. I will share on the screen what was previously distributed. This is a request for approval for the executive director to hire certain employees, and we will be asking the commission to approve this at this meeting. You may recognize this because it's very similar to what the commission approved in March, only in March there was a different list of employees, a longer list. This adds a few additional employees, and it starts off with a recitation of statutory provisions that are or may have a relevance here. And then the grant of approval is relatively simple. It gives approval for the executive director to hire one or more individuals into each of the positions listed below or comparable positions. And they are a deputy general counsel, an investigator, or a compliance agent. Those are positions that have been determined to be very important and needed at this point. And subsection B provides for the executive director to take associated steps that are normally undertaken in a hiring process. That's the same list that was approved previously. Also approved previously is what you see in section C, which is essentially a list of guidelines for the executive director to undertake in affecting hiring decisions. And subsection D is similar, providing that that all those associated with the process shall comply with applicable sources of law and commission goals and policies. And subsections E and F provide, as was provided the last time around, that the chair can suspend the authorization, or the commission as a whole can revise the authorization at any time. So this is not some type of irrevocable authorization to the executive director. But having said that, the hope is that these positions would be filled quickly. So with that, I don't know if the executive director would like to add anything, and otherwise he or I could entertain questions if the chair is open to that.
I think if there are any, I wonder if there are any questions from any of the commissioners. And I think you probably can stop the screen sharing, Randy. Thank you. Any questions? Don't think I see any hands in the air. I would now entertain a motion to approve the delegation as outlined on the screen share and in his explanation by our general counsel. Is there such a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second to that motion?
I second.
Thank you. And I think with that, Commissioner Bluestone, do you approve?
Yes.
Commissioner Calderon,
Yes.
Commissioner Ellison,
Affirmative.
Commissioner Kesrosian,
Yes.
Commissioner Luma. I'm sorry.
Approved.
Yes, thank you. And Commissioner West, please.
Yes.
I also approve. The motion is unanimously carried by those in attendance at the meeting. Again, General Counsel, thank you for the explanation and the preparation of the screen share. And I think with that, I now move on to item number 5 on our agenda, matters not anticipated by the chair at the time of posting. I don't know of any, and therefore I move on to item number 6, which is the fact that we will now entertain a motion to go into executive session to discuss strategy with respect to the ongoing litigation. Let me announce that the 2 lawsuits that were described by their caption at our last meeting, the Hovsepian versus Post lawsuit, which was filed in Suffolk County Superior Court, and the New England Police Benevolent Association versus Post lawsuit filed in Worcester County Superior Court, have been consolidated as of the beginning of this week in Suffolk County Superior Court. And I think with that, I would entertain a motion to go into executive session. Commissioner Bluestone?
Yes, I approve.
I'm sorry, I would entertain such.
I'll make that motion then.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
I'll second.
Thank you. Commissioner Calderon,
Yes, I approve.
And I think I heard Commissioner Ellison second. Commissioner Kazarosian,
Yes, approved.
Commissioner Luma,
Yes.
Commissioner West.
Yes.
I also approve. And with that, the motion is unanimously carried by those in attendance. We will not be going back into any public session at the conclusion of the executive session. Let me again thank the members of the public who have been in attendance. Enrique, do you want to take just a moment to explain to members of the public, because we didn't have public comment this time, how they might communicate any questions that they have? I think we both made reference to that at the beginning of our comments.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. As usual, as per our website, any questions from the press, Cindy Campbell is always available, certainly after the meeting. Members from the public or any other constituencies can submit their written questions to postcreports@mass.gov. It's also stipulated in our website. We monitor that inbox constantly. Or they can call our main number, which we also respond to fairly quickly. So, and I'll make myself available as necessary, and the members of our team will also make themselves available as necessary when we get questions from law enforcement agencies and whatnot.
Thank you. And I think that concludes the public portion of our meeting. And commissioners, Enrique, you sent a separate
A
link.
separate link, yeah, that's right. As per past practice, there's a separate link. It should be in your calendars or inbox.
Enrique, if you don't mind, could you resend it? I'm not finding it in mine. If you wouldn't. Thank you.
We'll do that.
Thank you. And can we just take a brief bathroom recess, commissioners, and we'll reconvene in about 3 minutes in our executive session. Thank you again, staff, everything that you've been doing. And commissioners, I'll see you in just a few moments. Thank you.